Hello and welcome to episode 128 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. In today's show, we're going to have our third installment of questions from the Sarah Enigma regarding a Walt Disney World vacation. She hasn't been to the parks since 2019, and she's already come up with some great questions in the previous two episodes. Please make sure to subscribe to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter at Rick_ear, Instagram at Rick Doherty TGTT, and on TikTok at Tall Guy Talks Travel. The Sarah Enigma has two Instagram accounts. She talks about Disney and books at the Sarah Enigma, and she focuses on chronic illness discussions at Sava, S-A-V-A .wellness. Let's get things started by welcoming Sarah back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Always a great time.
So we have been able to stretch out your questions about Walt Disney World to be 3 episodes long. Yes, I'm a little bit of a talker, but I also think you've come up with some really good questions. So this is a fun thing that we are definitely going to explore at some point in the future because I've had so much fun. Maybe we'll even have to have you come up with some universal questions, and we'll deal with that. But let's continue. You have 9 questions left for me about Walt Disney World. Let's go here.
Great. So I haven't been to Disney World since the pandemic started, which makes sense and probably for a lot of people. So I had this question written, and then just recently, Disney announced some new changes coming for next year. But for this year, it still stays the same. So for people who are planning to travel to Walt Disney World this year, what protocols were put in place or changes made due to the pandemic that remain in the parks now?
The biggest one that's going to be going away that is still here right now is the park pass reservations. I know this has been very, very controversial with people. I kind of like the park pass reservations. I know I am in the 100% minority in that respect. But right now, when you're making your plans for a Walt Disney World vacation, if it is this year, you still have to make a park pass reservation for the park you want to attend that day. And if you want to park hop, you can't do it until 2 o'clock with a valid park hop ticket. That's a big deal for a lot of people. I know some people are like, oh, I just like to wake up, and if it's rainy, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to Epcot today because there's a lot to do indoors at Epcot. Or if it's way too hot, I'm not going to go to Hollywood Studios or Animal Kingdom because those are the hottest parks. So maybe I'll go to Magic Kingdom that day and ride a lot of rides in the air conditioning. That's not how I plan vacations. Sarah, I know you pretty well at this point, and that's not how you plan vacations either. When I would travel to Walt Disney World, it was, we're going to Animal Kingdom first this day, and then we are park hopping over to Magic Kingdom, and then we are going to rope drop Epcot the next day, and then we are going to hop over to Hollywood Studios. Like, I always had that plan in my mind. I love to know where I'm going to be on any given day during my vacation, so that one of the reasons is when you're sitting at home and you could be like, in 3 weeks, I might be on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad right now. Like, I love to have the buildup be as much a part of the vacation as the vacation itself. But a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people like to wing it. So they're going to be excited about that. The Disney dining plan went away because a lot of these restaurants weren't able to open on short staffs. A lot of the all you care to enjoy buffet style restaurants couldn't operate at the height of the pandemic. Well, now the Disney dining plan is returning. So I think those are the two big ones, the park hopping rules, the park pass reservations, and the Disney dining plan. But so much has changed since the start of the pandemic that I'm probably missing some other things that just aren't coming to mind.
Yeah, that totally makes sense that there's a lot that could have changed since then, and now it just feels normal.
The worst change, however, at Walt Disney World since the start of the pandemic is that the Sarah Enigma has chronic illness and was not able to come during that time. So that has to change soon. That needs to be the biggest thing that changes due to some of the laxing in pandemic rules. But anyway, Sarah, your next question.
Yes, hopefully soon I'll be able to come back to the parks, but it's good to know about the park reservation system for people who are still going this year. And I totally agree. I'm with you. I want to anticipate that in 3 weeks I'm in Epcot, so it doesn't bother me. But just for everyone else, that's good to know. And the other big question I have, because of the pandemic and because of the laxing of protocols and everything, or if you want to say the end of the pandemic, is are the crowds still as busy as when the parks reopened?
When the parks reopened, there was nobody there. It was a ghost town. However, I think I understand what you're saying, that a lot of lines really got built up because maybe they would only be able to let one family onto a ride vehicle that used to carry 15 people or 8 people, and now it's only carrying 3. So, Rise of the Resistance, it was still really hard to get a boarding group. They were still doing boarding groups for that ride at the time because even though there were so many fewer people in the parks, there was so much less capacity on a lot of these rides. Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, I used to have to ride it by myself if I went by myself because it's a small cabin with 6 seats and they couldn't let other families in because they didn't want to spread the pandemic. So that was one person holding up a major ride that's supposed to eat a lot of people every hour. It wasn't as big of a deal at Epcot or Magic Kingdom, or very much it wasn't a big deal at Animal Kingdom, with the exception of Avatar Flight of Passage. The park that really still felt crowded right when the parks reopened was Hollywood Studios, because there are major e-ticket rides and not a lot of places for people to go besides those rides. Like the Frozen sing-along wasn't back yet. The Beauty and the Beast show wasn't back yet. The Indiana Jones stunt show wasn't back yet. So there was nothing for anybody to do but get in line for rides, and there weren't enough rides to spread out the people. So it definitely felt crowded. Right now, the parks are getting back to being very, very, very crowded. It's starting to feel like 2019 when we used to say there's no slow time at Walt Disney World. It's just a fact. I know a lot of people who took the pandemic very seriously. I was one of them. I like to feel I was one of them. I know people will say you went to Walt Disney World the first week it reopened, but I always kept distance. I did the hand washing thing. I always wore a mask. I was wearing masks a lot longer than other people were wearing masks at the Disney theme parks. You obviously take it seriously. I know my mother takes it really seriously. She's been back now a couple of times. I'm not going to say it's to the point that you don't think about it anymore, but the crowds are certainly back now.
Yeah, I think as someone who has been watching the crowds, that definitely was an interesting question to ask you because, like last year, particularly, we were watching Instagram and Magic Kingdom was just packed, right? Because it was like when everybody was allowed to travel again, Disney World got really, really busy. So I guess that was the other side of the question is, but you've already answered it. Is it as busy as it used to be? And your answer is yes. So that is good to know if you're planning that it is basically back to quote unquote normal busyness.
Unfortunately, but also fortunately, I mean, they feel they can do this because we'll never be out of the pandemic, but they feel like the spread isn't as omnipresent as it was, especially in those first few months. And then there were even times when international travel was blocked, so it started getting a little more crowded, but we were keeping it from spreading all over the world. And now they feel like they can let international travel in, so a lot of people like yourself who live in another country, now you can come down here again. So we're going to look back on this in 15, 20 years and just not believe what we dealt with during the pandemic. Walt Disney World won't be a huge thought process for a lot of people, but I think those of us who experienced it firsthand, it's going to be the first thing we think of whenever we think about the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's good that soon, hopefully, I'll be back down too. So that's great to know that we should still be planning for major crowds if you're planning a vacation. So thank you for answering that. Now, if you're planning to go this year, what 100th anniversary stuff is there to see, experience, or buy?
In the interest of full disclosure, the 100th is definitely really focused on Disneyland. There are things to see and to buy at Walt Disney World. They have some of the characters in special 100th outfits on occasion. There's definitely a lot of merchandise. Disney loves to throw that merchandise around. At the entrance to every park, there's a Disney 100 statue. However, I think this is something we should maybe discuss about Disneyland sometime in the future and all of the things that they have done over there on the West Coast. And of course, the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia has a big exhibit on the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company as well. But this doesn't really affect guests at Walt Disney World as much as the 50th affected them. And I think a lot of people would say they felt that the 50th celebration, the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World, was underwhelming for their expectations.
Interesting. Now, here's a very practical question. If there's bad weather at the parks when you're there, like I've seen torrential rain, it's been cold, it's been extremely hot, as we know, Hollywood Studios is the heat of the sun, as you say. What do you recommend to do in each park?
I'm going to give a couple things. We did an episode of this a while ago, like a long time ago on the podcast for weather and heat. But I think it's probably time that at some point in the future we revisit that topic because some of it may have changed a little bit. Major go-tos in Magic Kingdom are Carousel of Progress, Country Bear Jamboree, the Enchanted Tiki Room, the Hall of Presidents, Mickey's PhilharMagic. Those are 5 things right there that are going to get you out of the rain or heat for almost a half hour. That's a big deal because, as a lot of people know, those 2 o'clock rainstorms at Magic Kingdom usually only last for about a half hour. You can really duck into Country Bear Jamboree right as one is starting and come out, and it might have already passed through. When you talk about Epcot is probably easier and harder than some of the other parks because you do have to walk in between the pavilions, and that can be in the heat or in the rain. But there's a lot more to do inside in the pavilions. The Mexico pavilion is almost all inside. You have Mitsukoshi department store in the Japan pavilion. You have the Canada and China movies. You have the American Adventure, which takes like 45 minutes. The Voices of Liberty sing inside the American Adventure. There are some places to get out of the elements in Epcot as well. Hollywood Studios, my suggestion would be One Man's Dream, the movie about Walt Disney. It's about 20 minutes long. There may be 7 or 8 people who are in the theater with you when it shows. So that is definitely a way to get out of the elements and get to some place where you can just sit and really decompress for a moment. As far as Animal Kingdom, you have to wait in line to do these things, but the Finding Nemo musical, Festival of the Lion King, these are incredible experiences. But the nature of Animal Kingdom is a lot of the stuff is outside, so you might end up being stuck in the elements a little more at Animal Kingdom than at some of the other parks.
What is your favorite quiet place to take a break in any of the parks?
We just talked about when the parks first reopened, and when that happened, my favorite place was back by the quick service dining location in Japan. They have like a koi pond and some lanterns, and it was so empty at the parks back then that you could literally sit there for 5-10 minutes and not see another soul. That doesn't happen anymore. If you're looking for a quiet place, this can be a little difficult. The parks are loud. There are a lot of kids. Kids are hopped up on sugar. They're hopped up on energy. They're having the best week, the best day, but also the crankiest week and crankiest day of their lives. So kids are going to be making noise around you. I think at Magic Kingdom, I'd go back to Hall of Presidents. That, unless you find people who decide to make it political, which I've found that's calming down now a little. It's a serious show, so there's air conditioning, but also people aren't really talking. It's not super loud. It's not like Mickey's PhilharMagic where you're watching stuff in 3D, Donald's throwing musical instruments at you, stuff's exploding. You just sit there and sort of watch this documentary style movie followed by some really impressive animatronics. Quiet places in Epcot are just when World Showcase might have an area that isn't feeling loaded at that moment. A lot of times back at the Gardens in the UK pavilion, that's a really good place to sit on a bench and maybe just decompress, like we said earlier. Hollywood Studios doesn't really have those places at all. Maybe sitting on a bench across from Gertie and having an ice cream is the closest you're going to get there. I guess you could say One Man's Dream is another one of those places if you can get into a showing that doesn't have a lot of people. And Animal Kingdom is also kind of a sensory overload park. However, sometimes if you're on the Maharaja Jungle Trek or the Gorilla Falls Trail, you can find spaces where there aren't a lot of people. And maybe you're not seeing an animal, but you're just standing in a corner and letting yourself regroup.
So, what is your favorite Disney park secret? Meaning your favorite mural, your favorite location, your favorite hidden Mickey, or something else?
Did you stretch? Like, are you hydrated? Because this might take a while. I love the little tidbit about how the shutters in Liberty Square are supposed to be held on by leather. That's why they're all crooked, because they melted down the metal to use in the war effort. That is such a great little bit of trivia that I love to tell all the people who are there with me. I love, of course, that the brown markings in Liberty Square are supposed to be, let's just say, sewage, because back at that time, people would just dump their extra out into the street and it would make little, I'm sure, nice smelling rivers that would go down the streets. And Imagineers decided that they would recreate that in Liberty Square. There is not a bathroom in Liberty Square because they did not have bathrooms at that time in American history. The mural inside Cinderella Castle was actually designed by a former Nazi interrogator. That is a crazy, crazy story. He also did a mural outside the Land Pavilion in Epcot. So I think there are a lot of just these little things. That's what I love about Disney. That's what makes me come back time and time again. That's why I can't wait to take you to the parks and say, I bet you didn't know this thing. I mean, we all talk about how the Beatles broke up because John Lennon signed the paperwork dissolving the Beatles when he was staying at the Polynesian resort. And Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook in one of the ballrooms at the Contemporary Resort. So there's just a lot of that kind of stuff. When it comes to hidden Mickeys, I'm going to say my favorite hidden Mickey is that Expedition Everest. If you look at it on Google Maps, makes a gigantic hidden Mickey. That's the coolest one to me. Yes, when Disney's MGM Studios opened, it was the biggest hidden Mickey because the entire park made a hidden Mickey, but now that they have built some other things, it's chopped off one of Mickey's ears. But that's okay, because we got some really cool stuff that has been added to Hollywood Studios. So those are just a few examples.
Oh, that's incredible. I love hearing stuff like that. In your opinion, what is your favorite hotel to stay in on Disney property?
This one's unfair because I have my answer. It's my go-to. I am ride or die. I'm a very loyal friend. I'm also loyal to the things that I like, and I love Disney's Wilderness Lodge Resort. I could spend so much time at Wilderness Lodge. Not only is it my favorite resort to stay, which I have stayed there, but I haven't stayed there a lot. I more spend time there. I just love to go to Wilderness Lodge and sit in front of a fireplace, go to the Carolwood Pacific Room, which is another one of those little hidden things that Disney nerds like us really, really enjoy. The food there is phenomenal. You have Whispering Canyon Cafe, you have Artist Point, you have Territory Lounge, Geyser Point. Roaring Fork is a good quick service location. The grounds are beautiful. The resort itself is beautiful. It's themed to the Pacific Northwest, or I guess as you call it, the Pacific Southwest, because you are from Canada. It's the perfect resort, but I don't want to let some other resorts sort of fall by the wayside because Wilderness Lodge is a deluxe. So if you're going to spend money on Wilderness Lodge, I would recommend making sure you're spending a lot of time at the resort and that maybe you're not spending as much time in the parks because you're paying that premium to have this great resort. I also really like Disney's Polynesian, obviously. Everybody loves that one. I love Caribbean Beach now that it's on the Skyliner and it's a moderate resort, so it's a little more affordable to have great access to Epcot and Hollywood Studios. Coronado Springs is really, really underrated. That's one where one of the co-hosts here on the show, Marissa from Chicago, she loves to stay there now. She has stayed the last few times she's been at Walt Disney World at Coronado Springs, and they have great food. And now they have the new Gran Destino Tower, which is beautiful. And I even love Pop Century and the All-Star Resorts. I think there is nothing like being able to stay on Walt Disney World property. When I was a kid, there weren't that many resorts on property. So staying on property meant you're staying at the Poly or the Contemporary or the Grand or Wilderness Lodge, but they were costing you a ton of money. The All-Star Resorts aren't cheap, but they have made staying on property at Walt Disney World so much more affordable for families. There's so many people who have gotten this experience, and if somebody says one bad thing about the All-Star Resorts, like, we're going to have words, because I think it has really made a great Disney vacation that much more accessible. Is it accessible to everybody? No. Unfortunately, a lot of working class people will just never be able to afford a Walt Disney World vacation. But if a few more can, I think that's a really big deal. And maybe they don't have to stay at a Roach Motel on 192. Like, maybe they get that chance to take the buses to all of the parks. I get like stupid emotional about stuff like that because I know when we went in 2018, when we lived in Arizona, I had never stayed on Walt Disney World property. And we stayed at one of the All-Stars, and we were in the park so much that it really didn't matter where we stayed. But just knowing that, like, this was something that would have been so out of our reach when I was a kid because they didn't have this option. And now we were just getting on the bus every morning and taking the buses back to the resort at night. And you didn't have to worry about all of that other hassle. Like, anybody who has driven into the TTC at Magic Kingdom, that's a nightmare. It is a nightmare to get to the Magic Kingdom if you're not staying on property. So the All-Stars serve a great purpose.
And actually, you just briefly touched on my next question in that answer. But the Skyliner opened after I was there the last time. So, where does it go, and how is the actual ride? And specifically, how many people does each gondola hold?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, Sarah. So, the Disney Skyliner, I'm just going to say it starts at Epcot because I guess where it starts is sort of a philosophical question because it's a loop. So, it does and does not start. So, I'm going to say it starts at Epcot, and then the next stop isn't until Disney's Riviera Resort, the new DVC Deluxe Resort that is by Caribbean Beach. You can stop and get on or get off at that location, but it just moves through. Like, you go a little bit slowly, but you're going fast enough that it's a continuous motion and you don't 100% stop. Then the Skyliner takes you over Disney's Caribbean Beach Resort and into the major hub. So you have to get off at the hub. And then obviously if you get on at that stop, then it takes you back to Riviera and back to Epcot. At the hub, there's one extension that goes out to Disney's Pop Century Resort and Disney's Art of Animation Resort, and then comes back to the hub. And the other end of the hub takes you just from the hub to Hollywood Studios and Hollywood Studios back to the hub. So when this first opened, I loved it and I rode it a lot and I never had any fear on it. And I just was like, this is the best. And then I was on it and we were stopped because sometimes it does stop and you're just dangling there while they help somebody in a wheelchair. Or listen, I'm happy they do it. But there were tornado warnings the night before and I probably should have thought, you are not mentally and emotionally secure enough to be dangling while the wind is blowing you back and forth in this gondola. So the stretch between Epcot and the Riviera is a long stretch and you get very, very high above the ground. I don't do that very often anymore because that's where I was stopped here and it was windy and I just didn't like it. I have no problem going from Hollywood Studios to the hub, and I have no problem going from the hub to Pop Century Resort or Art of Animation. That's actually a really nice break in the day every once in a while because you can go to one of the quick service locations instead of eating at Hollywood Studios if you want, and maybe just get that quiet, like you mentioned earlier, space out of a theme park and just sort of decompress while walking around one of those resorts and looking at the statues from The Lion King or The Little Mermaid or Finding Nemo or Cars or the Roger Rabbit statue or any of those things.
That's really interesting. Thank you for describing that. I think a lot of people will want to do it to even get the views and just easier access to some of the other hotels. Now, a specific question as well is how big are the gondolas? Is it like 10 people, 4 people? Just because I come from Canada where we have gondolas that range from 4 people to 20. So I'm just interested to know how big they are.
I think it probably depends if we're talking Sarah or my wife Courtney. It's probably like 8 people. If we're talking myself or your sister, we're probably talking about 6 people because there are 2 benches. There's a bench on each side and you're in the gondola. I usually, and I would only suggest doing this if you have some comfort issues. I am on the autism spectrum and sometimes I don't, especially because sometimes when it does slow down, I do get a little scared. I will ask if I can wait and ride it by myself or ride it with just my party. But sometimes it's going to be about 6 to 8 people would be my guess.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense.
And they're only going to put you in with another party if it's very, very busy. Usually they'll try to keep them fairly relaxed.
That's good to know. And yeah, especially for tall people like you and my sister, it's good to know that the gondolas are a little small. So
Yes, I want to stress that her sister is tall and I was not making any other
yeah,
sort of reference with that comment.
leg length. Always have to think about leg length with tall people. So actually, we are at our last question. So I have hopefully a fun question to end this off on. Now I'm going to
Because
slightly
all the
change
other
it.
ones were so serious and morbid, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to change it slightly because I think you might have answered it in the last episode. So I'm going to say instead of one park, it's now going to be for each park. What is your go-to ride when you haven't been in the parks for a while?
Obvious answer at Magic Kingdom, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Honorary mention to the TTA People Mover. Those are my 2 favorite rides on property. When it comes to Epcot, I think I really love Living with the Land. I know it sounds kind of corny, but I just love to get on that boat and go around the greenhouse and see some of the, for lack of a better term, dioramas that they have that are so comforting. I really love living with the land. When it comes to Hollywood studios, this is also a tough one because most of the rides that are there have only been there since after I've been vacationing. So I don't know what it's like to come back and think I have to ride Rise of the Resistance or I have to ride Slinky Dog Dash. I really love, and I know this isn't a ride, but Muppet Vision 3D, because that was something I was doing at MGM Studios when I was a kid, and it still just has all the feels. I really love that attraction. I hope it stays forever. And Animal Kingdom, the obvious answer is Kilimanjaro Safari. That is that park to me. I was an adult when I first went to Disney's Animal Kingdom because it only was built in 1998, and I didn't go until 2005. And when I got on that ride, I was like, what is this? Like, this is something that I never thought I would experience in a theme park. Like, this is ridiculous. So I always have to do that. That used to be the first thing I would do on a vacation, is I would actually start a vacation at Animal Kingdom and immediately go to Kilimanjaro Safari. That was how I loved to start my Disney vacations. If I'm ever in a situation where I'm vacationing again, those answers might change. I don't think Big Thunder is going to change. I think that's going to stay. But, I really love Rise of the Resistance, and I could see wanting to do that first thing. I could see wanting to do Expedition Everest, like right out of the gate, instead of Kilimanjaro Safaris. And I know the answer for you, Sarah, but I still want you to tell everybody, what is your answer to that ride?
Well, in Magic Kingdom, which is always my first park to go to, it is funnily enough Winnie the Pooh. Because it's so classic to me. And when I went to Disneyland as a kid, Winnie the Pooh just stood out to me as Disney. So it's the same thing in Disney World. It's classic, and he's cuddly, and it just makes me feel like I'm home. So that would be my go-to ride for every vacation, is the mini adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
Sarah, you did such a great job coming up with these questions. I can't believe we got 3 full episodes out of it. That really helped me out in a very busy time in my life. So thank you for that as well. Always love having you on the show so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for answering all my questions. It's been so much fun.
This has been episode 128 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. We will have another brand new episode next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.